All armies are back, baby, and better than ever in Dragonflight thanks to the new profession changes that came with this expansion. And whether you're more of a hardcore player or a lazy casual gold maker like myself, this guide should serve you well regardless, because I'll be going over 3 different alt army builds, as well as how to set up your alt army in the most efficient way possible. So with that, I'll first go over what I think to be some of the best profession combos and builds and specializations for those professions, with each of these builds having a different style to cater to different types of playstyles. And with that, presenting the first build, which is also the one most closely resembling my own. And by the way, you can still have a bit of flexibility with these profession combinations and specializations, dependent on, for example, if you have characters that have certain professions or even old recipes already unlocked that you don't want to relearn and forego those old recipes for, that's totally fine. You can sort of adapt and use some of the things that I explained in this video how you will, depending on what you have available and your own preferences. Alright, so with that out of the way, coming back to my very first build for an alt army, we have the Gear Crafters and Work Orders army. And again, this is very similar to what I'm personally going for with my characters. So essentially, first of all, you want to get as many gear crafting professions as you can, which of course includes mainly blacksmithing, leatherworking, which covers plate and then mail and leather respectively, and then tailoring, which covers cloth of course, and capes, which are available to every class, right? But besides these, a couple of sort of overlooked and in my opinion underrated gear crafting professions are jewel crafting, which actually is able to craft rings and necklaces, so jewelry, and jewel crafters also get to craft a trinket on top of that, or a series of trinkets actually. And then inscription or scribes can actually craft staves and offhands, which I think are somewhat underrated as well, because these types of items are actually usable by a lot of different specializations. And real quick, as for my personal focus, at least so far into the expansion, I'm really prioritizing blacksmithing, and this is my build so far. I still have a lot of unspent points, which I'll probably dump into spell blades up to being able to use the illustrious insights optional reagent, but it'll kind of depend on the crafting orders that start coming in after the weekly reset. And alongside blacksmithing on my main character here, I also have inscription, on which I am prioritizing Dark Moon cards. So as you can see, I'm spec'd pretty deeply into a specific type of Dark Moon cards, and I also have the required points to be able to craft the treatises. And by the way, for a quick tip, treatises are or can be a really easy way to get crafting orders, because people will always be needing treatises, which are the weekly +1 profession knowledge consumables for each profession. And you'll often be able to find crafting orders for these, or public crafting orders. Or if you have alts, especially with an alt army, you can request crafting orders or personal crafting orders from your scribe on your other characters to be able to get their weekly profession knowledge, right? And then besides inscription, on a second character, I then have leatherworking, again for mail armor primarily, but I might also go into leather armor. And there's also like specialty armor, which you can also spec into for like PvP armor and things like that. And then I also have jewel crafting on that second character, on which I plan to specialize into or have already started to specialize into necklaces and rings and trinkets. And thus the general strategy is to be able to craft a decent variety of gear, but more importantly specialize deeply enough into each piece of gear, especially with your limited amount of profession knowledge. You do want to specialize more deeply. This seems to be more optimal than unlocking a large variety of gear, although you do want to have a decent variety so you can actually find crafting orders to fulfill. But then again, item level and quality is pretty much king in Dragonflight. People actually pay a super amount of premium for the even slightly higher item levels of gear compared to the lower item levels, where they pretty much don't want them, at least for most of the items that I've seen. So again, it's really important to invest enough points to be able to have a high enough skill level to craft these higher quality and item level items, and also be able to use the optional reagents to also help you boost the skill level to match the higher qualities occasionally. And the reason that I believe this to be a relatively lazy gold making alt army strategy, and why I prefer it, is that you pretty much just log in occasionally, right? Maybe once or twice or thrice a day on each of your characters with gear crafting to check for crafting orders and be able to fulfill them pretty quickly, right? With pretty much no hassle. And as for the specific specialization points that one can go for, again, I prefer saving at least some of my points to wait for when the crafting orders actually show up for me to then invest those points, because it's sort of an assurance. But if you do want some more specific reference, I'll link some useful wowhead guides below that you can refer to not only for this gear crafting build, but also for the other builds in this video I have prepared for you. So with that, moving on to build number 2, and of course again, I want to also remind you that somewhat mixing and matching any of these builds is fine as well. And also, you will be able to eventually max out all of your profession trees over time, although it will take quite a bit of time. But anyhow, for the second build, I present to you the super lazy cooldowns alt army, which of course relies on the profession cooldowns, and these are not even daily cooldowns because they refresh even more frequently than that, and have made a triumphant return in Dragonflight for mainly 3 professions: jewel crafting, alchemy, and even tailoring. So starting off with jewel crafting under the faceting specialization, which is the one mainly for crafting gems and better quality gems. If you actually pump most of the points into the center node, which is the generalist node, so to speak, instead of specializing super heavily into a specific one at first at least, you'll be able to unlock all 4 specializations, and doing so allows you to unlock 4 additional transmutes. So by default you get the orange gem transmute, and by the way, I hadn't explained it yet, but essentially these transmutes turn uncommon gems into rare gems, and the default one that you get, which is the orange version, is not very valuable because everybody has it without having to specialize. But each sub-specialization that you unlock under faceting actually unlocks a new type of transmutes, giving you a total of 5 transmutes if you unlock all these subspecs, which again does require you to put 40 points into the middle node, which if you want to, for example, specialize deeply into one of these specific types of gems, and there's air, earth, frost, and fire in addition to the default one that you have. If you want to spec deeply into that, then you might not be able to unlock all the transmutes right away, but it really depends on your playstyle. If you want the laziest version and don't even want to bother with like cutting gems as much, you can just unlock all the transmutes first, right? And moving on to alchemy, there basically is just one specialization path for transmutation, and later on you'll definitely have points left over to go into whatever you want to do. But the first thing you want to go for is alchemical theory, and then with it you want to spec into transmutation. And once you max out transmutation, you can also spec into decaology, which is below, which will also unlock additional transmutes for you. So both of these subspecs actually unlock new transmutes for you, on top of making your transmutations occur or being able to cool down more quickly and allow you to do them more efficiently. Last but not least, moving on to tailoring, and this can actually justify having 2 or more alts or characters that spec differently into tailoring. But anyhow, for the cooldown-based spec, you want to spec into draconic needlework and then pick up azure weaving and or chronocloth. So you can actually max out one side first, and I recommend doing so. And by the way the cloth or bolt cooldowns work for tailoring is that they're actually charges that replenish over time. And by speccing deeply into either end of these subspecs, you'll be able to greatly reduce the recharge time for these bolts, right? So the general recommendation is to spec into one side fully first, get the 20 points in to greatly decrease the cooldown, and then spec into the other side. So whether you do azure weave first or chronocloth first, you can actually get both cooldowns reduced drastically if you have enough points eventually. And thus, because it takes quite a few points to even max out one side of these talent trees for the reduced cooldown, it might be good to have multiple tailors, especially if you happen to have tailoring on more than one character. For instance, you can have one focus on one side of the cooldowns, or you can have one character focus on both of the cooldowns while another character focuses on crafting, right? Whatever your preference is. And as I mentioned before, quality is definitely king in Dragonflight, and that people will pay a great premium for items even of a slightly higher item level. And thus, by having this sort of synergistic relationship, so to speak, between your characters, by having one focus on the highest quality and the most frequent number of materials, and the other focusing on the best skill level in terms of crafting, you can actually synergize between your own characters with your so-called alt factory and get the highest quality items that way. And this happens to also lead nicely into my final build, which is the high synergy alt factory, or what I like to call having one of everything pretty much, or even two of some professions, like with tailoring, right? And this is probably also the most profitable way to make gold, but it is a lot more hands-on as you'll be doing a lot more commodity crafting. But if you do have the time for this and have enough characters, you can actually provide a lot of different high quality materials if you spec that way for your main crafters, for example, right? And throw in a gatherer or two with high skill to be able to not only grab a higher quality reagents, but also be able to refine them. This is sort of similar to smelting from back in the day. With gathering professions, you can actually refine your base materials into higher quality ones if you spec into it. So that's yet another layer of quality refinement and upgrading with even your gatherers. And for a few examples of how certain professions synergize, jewel crafters, if you're familiar with the vials that alchemists use, jewel crafters can actually make them now. And not only are these vials now used by alchemists, of course, for potions and elixirs and such, but scribes use them quite extensively too, right? And so if you have a jewel crafter that specs into these commodities, namely the draconic vials, and are able to consistently craft quality 3 draconic vials, this will be greatly beneficial and profitable, not only to sell standalone, but also, especially if you have an alchemist and or scribe to be able to utilize them, you'll then be able to craft other subsequent high quality items themselves by having these higher level vials. And there are just tons of synergies like this available throughout Dragonflight, and thus I think having one of every profession, especially crafting ones, can be greatly beneficial. Another example is leatherworking utilizing the rune writhe bark, which is a pretty important commodity crafted by scribes. And speaking of scribes, they also make the treatises, right, of course, which you can actually order through personal crafting orders on each of your alts to gain your weekly profession knowledge, which is very convenient indeed. Other examples include the aforementioned alchemy with transmutation, where you'll be able to produce these elements which are used in lots of different crafting, including Dark Moon cards. And there's also the decayed element, which is kind of a rare element used in certain types of specialty crafting, like with leatherworking. And yet another powerful way that professions synergize is with profession accessories and tools. As you know, each profession can equip 2 accessories and 1 tool, and lots of different professions provide various ones for each other essentially. And some of the rarer versions are, or higher item level versions are buy on pickup, which you can also conveniently order through crafting orders, or you can also craft some of the green ones for each of your alts as well. And again, I don't think there's specifically one best build for this. I personally like to, or aim to have one of everything. But if you happen to have characters you're quite attached to that have the same professions, that can still be quite powerful as well. And lastly, real quick, in terms of how to efficiently set up each of your alts for your alt army or factory, as I like to say it. First of all, I don't think a lot of people know this, but on an alt, you can actually teleport from your capital city portal room straight to Valdrakken, and then start learning your professions and skilling them up, you know, picking up your weekly quests and profession quests without even having to set foot in the starting Waking Shores area of the Dragon Isles. But if you do need that reputation from the Dragon Scale Expedition faction, it would be good to do some of the introductory quests, because that does give quite a lot of reputation with relatively low effort, not to mention the experience points you can get on your character to level up if you need it. And for rep, you definitely want to pay attention to the factions that each of your professions will need to unlock recipes with. You can actually go into each profession to look at the unlearned recipes and the resources for that. So you definitely want to keep up with your reputation per week, your profession knowledge per week, and things like that, right? And for that, I won't be covering all the details in today's video, because I have yet another video for that called Gold Making Daily, Weekly, and even Monthly Routines that covers all the profession knowledge sources and things you need to keep up with, which with profession knowledge, which by the way translates into the ability to make gold on each character, being capped on a weekly basis. The more characters and alts you have that are rolling through profession knowledge each week, the more sort of exponentially you're gaining, or multiplicatively, right, that you're gaining profession power per week, so to speak, right? And that's why I think, or that's part of the reason why I think alt armies are so powerful, especially during the first few weeks or even months of Dragonflight. The more characters you have progressing at the same time through profession knowledge and renown as well, the more power that you're gaining that is not capped by a weekly cap, right? As compared to if you only have 1 or 2 characters. And that is pretty much all I wanted to show you in today's video. Let me know in the comment section below if you wanted to add anything, and I'll definitely reply to your comments. Consider checking out my YouTube channel for even more guides, and my second channel if you want to see how to start your own YouTube channel. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.